Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of ValueCast. Very much looking forward to talking to my guest today. Today, we're going to focus on RFP processes, specifically on how you can look at simplifying RFP processes to bring value without removing some of the pain, with removing some of the pain to bring the value that you would want. So to discuss that topic today, I've got a very, very experienced procurement transformation expert. SK, nice to have you on ValueCast.
Thank you, Alex.
No problem at all. Your career history is really quite impressive. You spent a lot of time in the oil and gas industry, but also working for consulting businesses as well. But maybe if you wouldn't mind just giving a little intro to yourself and why you are where you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on the ValueCast program. I've been following you for many months now. I'm very impressed with the topics that you drive. So very quick introduction of myself. My name is SK Roy. Engineering MBA in supply chain background. Worked in the oil and gas industry, about 35 years of experience, mostly with ExxonMobil and Chevron, and also worked in management consulting for some of the large firms. In a semi-retired mode right now, trying to give back to the function, getting involved in a lot of procurement transformation projects, which is probably what I've focused on in my career anyway. If my previous boss, the chief procurement officer, had to describe me, she always used to call me a change agent. So that's how I try to introduce myself.
Great.
Very, very passionate about the procurement function and how procurement function needs to change from the traditional image. And we can get into those discussions today about how procurement needs to evolve from what it used to be to where it should be.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. There's a lot of people trying to drive and give advice around that exact topic, but it's really about taking action and really pushing it through. Transformations are really a really interesting space, especially in today's world with all the advancements in technology. It's sort of it's difficult to know where to go sometimes with what's available in the market, but there definitely is a lot of tools. But the reason why we're talking today isn't necessarily just about the tools. It's actually more about the business process and the way businesses approach managing, requesting for services from supply chain, from your supply chain. So it's I've been involved in many RFPs from both more the supplier side, but within the supplier side, also buying services ourselves. And I've seen some so overly complex things that when you boil it down, a lot of the work that goes into it almost it's not pointless, but it's can be quite laborious and quite difficult to manage. So really, really interested in your thoughts about simplifying this process, but without looking and risking due diligence at that level. So what's your experiences first of the RFP process? Like, why do you feel it needs to be simplified?
Sure. So thanks. So I think if you look back at the origin of the procurement function was really established as a independent. And I like to use the word control and compliance or anti-fraud measure because a lot of companies were concerned about people with conflict of interest kind of getting involved and getting too close to their third-party partners. So procurement or purchasing function, whatever you want to call it, was established to be that so-called gatekeeper. And it was initially established as a very administrative process. And unfortunately, a lot of those administrative hangovers or those images still reside in our existing processes, where procurement wasn't supposed to do anything other than taking the documents from the different business units, putting them together, and really acting, sorry to use the word, but acting like a post office. Mm-hmm. And that kind of might have led to the fact that procurement did not have any authority to optimize, make the package look more attractive. How do I make the the value proposition more attractive to the suppliers, because they were basically devoid of the authority. Like, no, you cannot change the specification. You cannot reduce the 50 questions that I have asked you to ask on, X particular function, right? So that probably might have led to the very bureaucratic image. And again, I have been on both ends of the table. So I've seen some of these questions where, like, wait a minute, wasn't question number 17 and 37 and 67, are they not asking the same thing over and over again? And why is it appearing 3 times? Because no one was given the authority to do that.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that leading procurement functions have taken an approach to say that, hey, if this document is going through my function, I have to add value in terms of making it attractive, making it value adding to the supplier, and leading procurement functions do take a very active role on packaging the RFP to make it look attractive. And not just the RFP. Again, we'll get into the details of it, but RFP is only what I would call the formal document exchange through which you are, exchanging some information back and forth between the two parties. But there is a lot that should and should happen before the RFP goes out, right? So in terms of what is the procurement function doing on market research? So in terms of understanding who are our potential partners, let's say if the business, and I'm just going to use an example, they have a requirement to move a product from point A to B. Now, moving point A to B is a very simple value proposition. I don't think you're going to get someone very excited if you just say that I'm going to move it from A to B. But usually it is always there's a problem associated with moving a product from A to B. So how can procurement play a role in terms of extracting the juice out of the business to say that, hey, if I have to describe my RFP and I always use this challenge, like if I cannot describe my RFP in one sentence or one page, then you have lost the meaning of the RFP process, right? So if I have to go back to my suppliers and say that, hey, I'm dealing with problem A, B, and C, and then say that I have to move my product in the process of moving my product A to B, you'll find that suppliers will be a lot more excited to actually respond to you when they see someone describing a problem that is very close to their heart, right? And that's when you should, and again, I always say that you should have a simple RFI process. And the RFI process could be as simple as 3 questions. And I keep this challenge to my teams to say that, no, your RFI doesn't have to be a 25-page. You don't have to bring in 25 people to evaluate the RFI response. You could send out 3 questions, and those 3 questions could be those meaty questions that differentiates the strong contenders from the not so strong contenders, and the ones that should not even receive any response, right? And that will make sure that if you go through the market research, the target audience for sending an RFI, request for information. When you have gone through that RFI, describe your problem, and then when you go through an RFP, you would already have created that buzz and that excitement on both ends when the suppliers are actually keen and almost waiting to respond to you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You're almost changing the narrative from, and using your example of getting from point A to point B, rather than going to your supply chain and saying, I've already drafted a solution. I know how to get from point A to point B. So I just need you to provide a service to get me to that point. Instead, from what I'm taking from your words is you actually flip it on its head and saying, no, supplier, I'm at point A. I need to get to point B. I've got these problems in the chain to get to that position. And I'm coming to you to find out whether your business can help us do that, right? So here's the problem statement. Here's what we're trying to fix. Do you feel comfortable enough to be able to come to us and help us guide us towards the right solution? So in essence, you're using them at that RFI stage to really work out, well, based on what we know about the market, and based on what you're telling us, maybe you're a good fit to go forward further. Is that pretty much, am I interpreting that correctly? Okay.
And I think that definition of problem statement, and I always believe, and I've practiced this, I can tell you that the work on the RFP process starts about 6 to 12 months before the RFP goes out, right? Because if you are taking, pieces of document from different functions, packaging it together and sending out an RFP 3 days before, 3 days after you receive those documents, then that's not a good RFP. That you should, and I've often called out a timeout on those RFPs, because a good RFP is where you actually start defining what should be the scope and what should be the nature of the RFP that goes out next year, 1 year before the RFP goes out, because that's where you start adding value. And that's where the concept of category management processes come in, because now you have done a much better job of working with your stakeholders on defining, scoping, changing specifications, shaping the questions, even coming up with, evaluation criteria, like how do I compensate, do I compensate them purely on price? Because the easiest thing for the suppliers and even for the finance people is to say that, hey, this person brought in a widget, I've done the goods receipt, the widget cost $1, I'm going to pay them $1 and you move out. But that's not value adding, that's cost, right? The real value is that, hey, I brought in a widget. The widget might cost you $1, but I'm actually going to turn this widget around and I'm actually going to sell it for $5. How do I link the supplier's compensation to the $5 revenue that I'm going to make from that widget, right? How do I hold the supplier accountable, and especially on the direct spend, because obviously 80% of the company's spend is on direct spend, the cost of goods sold. How do I bring in the supplier? How do I get them to have a skin in the game on my profitability, my productivity, my downtime? Because unless you start including the supplier inside your supply chain, the supplier will always treat themselves as an outside party who he or she is very happy dropping, and literally I'm using the word dropping it, and immediately raising an invoice for $1 and say, I'm happy being paid for it. No. If I include you in my production, if I include you in operations, if I have a problem, and the problem could be a quality problem, but if I involve you, I will actually make the supplier's product, because suppliers are actually keen, believe me, 80% of the suppliers actually want to receive that feedback on what happens to that widget after the widget was dropped at the warehouse. Because unless they receive that feedback, they can never make their product more value adding and more competitive. So suppliers love that when you involve them, but obviously there has to be, I would say, respect, that trust with the suppliers, and that trust starts with how you start engaging them. And I've seen, Alex, believe me, I've seen so many horrible examples of, oh, I'm sending you this NDA, you have to sign the NDA within 24 hours, and immediately after you sign the NDA, I'm going to send you a 300-page RFP and you have to respond in 3 days' time. Like, and and this is a $200 million RFP, right? And the supplier is hearing it for the first time 3 days before the response is due. That's not respect, right? I mean, that's like, you're not treating me, you're almost creating a rank, right? You're almost saying that I'm the king and you are, like you're not in the same rank.
You're a commodity, yeah. You're not, and
Exactly.
I'm a strong believer. I'm always been a strong believer, and talked about it in previous podcasts, that stakeholder management, internal and external, is more important than the questions you're asking, right? Because if you could be asking 3 questions or 20 questions, if you're not building that relationship, the likelihood is that, one, the business aren't going to give you the detail you need to demonstrate the value you can get from your supply chain. And then the supply chain is probably not going to give you the best response, because they're like, well, hold on a minute. Are these people really invested in me? Yes, we can make some money from them, but is there a long-term relationship that we can build with them? So yeah, I'm spot on with you on that one. It's a big point, right? It's a very big point.
I mean, other things, since you talked about simplification of the RFP, right? So I always, and you have seen this in your normal life, and I know UK is very prompt about, if you go to a government website, you will usually see that, hey, time required to fill this form is 3 minutes, or this might take 7 minutes time. I always challenge and to my team members that if you create an RFP, I want to have an estimate of how much time it will take the suppliers, objectively, again, not a very biased opinion, but objectively, how much time will it take for the suppliers to fill that information?
Mhm.
And more importantly, how much time will it take for us as a company to digest that information? Because if it is taking 10 hours for you to fill, as you as in the suppliers to fill that information, it will obviously, that 10 hours times 5 respondents, it will take us X number of hours to respond. And I want to have that information, like, hey, how much time does it take the suppliers to fill that information? And how much time does it take internally for us to respond, visible to the sponsor of the RFP process, right? So when I go to my sponsor and say that, hey, we are going to send this RFP, I want to have those two numbers mentioned against them. And I know that this is a joke, and I've mentioned this, and I haven't tried this out in practice, but I always say that the best way of optimizing the RFP process is to estimate how much time the supplier will actually take to fill that information and cut a check to them to say that, hey, we really, and I know we haven't tried it yet, but if it's taking you 2 hours to fill that information or 20 hours, I'm going to compensate you for 20 hours, because that's the only way you can put pressure within the system to actually say that, hey, instead of asking 20 questions, can I ask those 2 questions that will really differentiate the good one from the not so good ones, right?
Mhm. Yeah, interesting concept. You should let us know how it goes if you do implement it. Yeah, and I
In
mean,
fact, the other joke I have, and I've actually mentioned this, that if a CPO is concerned about the complexity of the RFP, make the CPO one of the respondents of the RFP. So you send them an RFP and ask the CPO to respond to it. And believe me, the next RFP that will go out will be a very simple RFP, because usually the CPOs are many layers away from the stuff that is going out. Just make them to respond one RFP, right? Believe me, everything gets sorted out
yeah,
after that.
yeah. That's interesting because a lot of people, when they hear the word simplification, they think, right, that means we're going to go from 20 questions to 3 more direct questions. We're going to reduce the time limit that it's going to take to respond. It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about here. Actually, simplification is about having good relationships with your business and your supply chain. It's also about making sure that the communication across both sides, internal and external, is completely open and clear, in essence, to ensure that everyone knows exactly what's going on. So really, when I reflect on what you're just saying, it is actually just about the human piece of doing the communication and the stakeholder engagement in a certain way that enables it. Now, yeah, if you've got 55 to 100 questions in an RFI, of course you want to go through and review to make sure they're all quality, but that's part of, if you have the right communication in place and the right structure in place, those things will be easier to deal with.
Yeah. And also there's a little bit of that consistency in the message, right? And I'll give you a very simple example to drive the point about consistency. So
Mm-hmm.
again, I've been working with a company. The company is not a very mature process from a procurement perspective. So we were going through, an RFP process, and before we send out an RFP, there was a policy that says, suppliers have to sign an NDA. The
Uh-huh.
NDA was, believe me, a 70-page NDA, because like the lawyers had basically come up with all the possible scenarios that they could conceive of, and suppliers, obviously that's a turnoff for any supplier, that before they receive an RFP, if they have to go through and involve their lawyer in signing a 70-page NDA, that's a
Mm-hmm.
turnoff to begin with, right? So I
Yeah.
said, okay, why do you have an NDA? Well, no, that's a requirement. We have to have an NDA. And then, before we issued the RFP, and this was being issued through a system, so their supplier had to be registered in their system. So now the policy said that no, the supplier has to go through a full due diligence even for them to respond to the RFP. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I accepted it. That RFP, that due diligence process took about 45 days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm coming to the point on consistency. So I said, okay, if your processes are that complex, that, you have to have a 70-page NDA and a 45-day supplier due diligence process on the different aspects. How have suppliers been paid? I mean, how do suppliers get into the system? Because if, let's say, the business obviously cannot wait for 6 months to happen, what happens? Well, the suppliers do their work, they send us an invoice, and then we just pay them. I said, okay, and that's not consistency, right? Because now, if suppliers done the work, they send an invoice, and then you pay them, within 10 days or 15 days. That's inconsistent. So it's also important to have the consistency in the process, that respect that I talked about, that skin in the game. So, I mean, it's a combination of many things. But it all goes back to, how do you treat your suppliers? Do you treat them as an outsider? Do you treat them as partners? Right? If you treat them as partners, then you'll treat them with respect. If you treat them as outsiders, that question of respect will always come in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember, I actually vividly remember a discussion with Tom Mills quite a while ago, that we were going on similar veins around this, because if you haven't got that level of respect and that relationship, if a supplier wants to challenge you, if you don't have that respect and trust and relationship, it's much harder to deal with. And the likelihood is, what will happen is the supplier will just end up responding to all of the questions that are required when actually they didn't think that was right. And then, you as a buyer, and I'm not really talking about the supplier in a way, but then you as a buyer, you probably haven't got the best responses you can get, because you've been quite standoffish with your supply chain, and you haven't really looked at providing value, because it isn't just about providing value to your business. It is about providing value to your supply chain. I am more likely as a provider to want to work with a buyer that is interested in my business, right? As well as vice versa. What other areas do you think then that procurement can add value to the simplification of the RFP process? Because we've talked a lot about the RFI, the early stages. You've come up with a couple of strategies around and some ideas you want to implement about, the questions and that engagement. But is there anything else in that process you think could help?
So I think we talked about the simplification. We talked about, and always use the word painting. So, I mean, the procurement professional needs to start treating the RFP like a painting. It should really come from the heart, and they should feel really passionate about it, and to own that process, right? When it comes to and again, the RFP is only, and I use the word dating because like it's easy for people to relate to. It's the actual process is not the dating process. The actual process is the long-lasting marriage and the family that you establish together with the partner. So the RFP is only the dating game, or the initial part of the process. It's really how you're treating the suppliers during the process. Are you treating them on a very arm's length basis? Are you treating them as partners? Are you involving them? Do you have suppliers review, performance review with the suppliers on a quarterly or semi-annual basis? Are you providing them with meaningful feedback? How long is your relationship? And again, I always ask this question whenever I meet my client. And they say, oh, but we have had this supplier for the last 40 years, so they're very good. I said, okay, and how do you know that they are the good supplier? Oh, we're very good friends with the suppliers. But I said, objectively, do you actually test the performance? And then you start kind of getting to that, oh, they've had this relationship for 40 years because they've never really known anything better than that particular supplier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's where I think procurement can be that objective, kind of the conscience of the organization to say, and that supplier, I mean, there could be two scenarios. One is that supplier is really, really good, and they really are the best, but it has been tested through some objective tools that, yes, they are offering the best value. The other one could be that, hey, that's a very politically charged situation, and no one actually has dared to disrupt that process because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And that's where procurement should add value from the RFP process perspective, or from the overall sourcing process.
Yeah. No, it's quite. It is an issue. I like to bring in always sort of real life examples outside of business sometimes. And as you know, we both got a love for cricket. And, I'm a cricket coach, right? So you put the scenario in, I'm doing a 10-week cricket coaching campaign to get the kids to have fun, but also get to a level of skill where they can take their skills on, right? If I treat those children in a way where I'm just trying to robustly teach the skills and not build the relationship with these children, the likelihood is that they're probably not going to get as good end product as you would if you put a little bit more time into the relationship and things around that. So I'm really pleased that you keep rolling back to, back to that piece of people, right? It is really, really all about that, because simplification, again, people will talk about it in different ways, but let's hone in on that one thing, that it needs to be the people. But there are other things, right, that help simplify the procurement, the procurement of direct or indirect services for a client. Automation and technology is moving rapid, extremely rapid year on year. In fact, I'd probably say in the last 12 months, it's hard to keep up with those type of things. Like, wanted to ask you a question on 2 points. One is, let's just stick to the first point. So when it comes to tools within that process, obviously the human part of it, you can't really remove that. You don't really want an AI bot speaking to your supply chain. That destroys everything. But what about the simplification of bringing in specific tools? Do you find that they've added real value to that process, or do you believe that actually it's not the biggest thing? Yes, they add a little bit of value, but they don't weigh up to the other things that you've mentioned today.
So tools are really a platform for data exchange, and I would say that yes, I strongly believe in the tools if they are implemented properly, because I've also seen, and the same tool, I mean, you can take in Ariba, Coupa, GP, whatever tool you name. I'm not recommending any one of them, because they're really 90% the same. I mean, if you look at the value proposition from all these Gartner Magic Quadrant, they're really 90% images of each other, and neither one of them is better than the other. But it's really about how you implement that tool. It's just like an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, you can create some fantastic financial models, and you can use Excel to do 2 + 2 = 4 also, right? And I've seen some great examples of how these tools have been implemented, where data is being exchanged once the data is visible to all the stakeholders in the company, and the stakeholders can go in, pull the data out. And I've seen some horrible examples where the tool has been implemented and then almost goes back to that, that the image of that administrative bureaucratic process. And I always use Bill Gates' quotation that if you take an inefficient process and if you add automation, it amplifies the inefficiency.
Correct.
So I've seen some horrible examples, right? It's like, oh, but this function cannot view that or this function cannot view that information. So ends up that the tool that we are using, and you can use any one of the source to pay tool with a picture in mind, where the tool is just being used for that, I would say that event exchange, and then everything else is happening outside of the tool. And then I ask a question like, why are you using the tool? Well, audit wants us to use that tool, or we use it because audit wants to have a single record of what happened during the year. And then everything else happens outside of the tool. I said, then you are not using the tool properly. If you're using the tool properly, almost any and every exchange that you have between the two parties, the buying and the seller, can happen through that tool if you implement it properly, right?
Yeah.
But I would say only less than 5%, or maybe even I would say less than 2% of the implementations that I've seen are implemented in a way that information is actually flowing back and forth. 98% of the cases is just being used to tick the box. Okay, audit is very happy because I'm using it to launch the sourcing event, or where is my contract? Oh, my contract is in, and you use Ariba, GP, whatever, Coupa. My contract is in Ariba, but how did the contract get developed? Who got the sign off? What was exchanged? Or everything happened in Microsoft Word and it happened in Outlook. Now, that's not a good use of technology, right? In my personal view.
Yeah, to be honest with you, SK, I love the way you've rolled it back again to people. Like I'm a very leadership focused person, and I'm I'm a big believer that it doesn't, it's great the way, technology is advanced to help simplify some of the administrative processes. But, if anything, it's great, even better, because it enables those people who are leading and the teams that need to make the decision to spend more time doing that, right? So if you're a procurement professional who's sort of, working with the business, you're like, right, we've agreed the scope of what you want. We really understand your business problem. And if it's a case of going, right, let's put that onto a system who will then help us with the automated approval process to get it ready to go to the supply chain, and then we can automate it to the supply chain. Great, right? Takes the administrative burden out of doing all those tasks that you don't really want to be doing during it. But I am similar to you. I have seen many, and unfortunately, I'm not shy enough to hold my hand up and say, being a part of bad implementations in the past, we will learn from experiences. But it's so critical. You sometimes get procurement teams who will excel in what they're doing, but actually when you look at the internal side of how they're managing a process, they're not practicing what they should be preaching, if that makes sense. So it does happen, right? It does happen. Like I say, I've done it myself. It's not the greatest way.
But I've seen like the use of technology. You do your sourcing on a digital tool, you convert it into a PDF. The PDF gets deposited in some shared drive or some repository, and then when the invoice has to be paid, the invoice payment guy has to pour through 400 pages of the contract to find out what the rate was. Now that, I would say, is no better than what we were doing in 1970s, right? Because 1970s, this is exactly how invoices were getting paid, right?
Yeah. I think
since we're talking about technology, let me also jump into AI, right? I've recently been talking to a client, and they're saying, "Oh, we can use AI to automate the RFP process." I said, "Okay, which part of the RFP process are you trying to automate?" "Oh, we'll send out the RFP process, and then when the responses come in, the AI can do all the evaluation." I said, I would rather use the AI process to optimize the 300 question. And this, believe me, was a 300-page RFP that they were sending out. And I said, I would rather use AI to say that, hey, take these 300-page questions and turn it into a 20-page question, which is the value-adding one, rather than, oh, I don't have to spend so much time evaluating them, because that's the use case of AI that I personally get excited about. And believe me, while I'm talking to these guys about the RFP evaluation process, on the sales side, they're also developing a tool that says that, hey, how do I respond to a 300-page RFP when I receive it from a sales side? So they're actually using AI to fill those questions. At some point of time, it'll be one AI, another AI talking to each other. And what have we done in the process? Nothing much, right?
Yeah. It's it compounds each other, really. But and you're absolutely spot on, right? AI is, I spend a lot of my time speaking to new startups and technology firms about how they're utilizing AI, agentic AI, and some of them have got it right, but you're right. It goes down to how what bits of that process should you really be focused on simplifying. Anything that is requiring a strategic decision, such as going through proposals from supply chains, you need to be looking at that detail, because how are you going to truly assess? Now, do you want a technology to maybe help you do some of the checks and balances? Can you check accreditations of XYZ? Can you, to your point, can you help streamline that front end piece? And maybe there's a technology that, if you're a business, one of the problems you've had is standardizing your templates to go out. Yeah, you can use a technology to standardize, and suggest. We're seeing technologies now that can help suggest, I've got this requirement. Actually, I can spit out milestone deliveries and things for you to give you a template, but you still need to look at that and go, yes, I agree with that template. So I'm definitely aligned with you on that. It's AI is good for the right things. And I think we see a lot of chat, on LinkedIn and other platforms that is the case, really. So you're a lover of AI, but in the right way, rather than just
in the right way, and where the problem lies, not in this, sorry to use the word, but these attractive, sexy use cases that tend to get the eyeballs, but really not the real that's not where the real value lies.
Yeah, definitely that. I like the one. Yeah, I've actually been working with one provider recently who have done exactly that, which is sort of simplifying that front end piece to save buyers time, sort of reducing the value, improving the value they provide to their supply chain while still keeping the quality of the RFP or the requirements that they're going to send out to them in the way that they should. So that's pretty good. I can't believe it. We're actually already, well into half an hour and been really enjoying our chat. So we're probably gonna wrap it up in a second. But I was sort of racking my brain. Well, if you're going to a business, brand new business, who maybe are looking to transform how their procurement function operates and how they engage their supply chain, I was going to ask you what you think the top tip would be, but the way I'm gauging it really is look at your people, look at your leadership, look at the relationships you have. Those are far more important than the process. Process is important, but if the people leading it aren't in the right place, like, am I right in my thinking that's where you've been going?
Yep.
Yeah, and I again, I think people should continue to step back. Like, we've all got to innovate, we all want to do new things, but if we forget about the human interaction and the people and how we come to those things together, we get lost in this myriad of shiny toys and process and governance, and then suddenly you're right, we're back in the 1970s. So very interesting. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you ever so much. One thing that did interest me, though, right? You say you're semi-retired, but you're obviously very motivated about what you do. Like, what keeps you going every day, SK? What keeps the drive for you to continue wanting to add value in the work you do?
So I would say I'm semi-retired from the fact that I'm not working an 8 to 5 in an organizational hierarchy, but very active from keeping myself intellectually occupied. And since both of us have this a love for cricket, and I always believe that procurement as a function, I think it's still got a long way to go in terms of moving up to the part where business actually starts treating procurement as an integral part. I mean, procurement is still treated as that kiosk that people have to go to rather than I want to go to that kiosk, right? It's like you have to go to the kiosk rather than I need to go because they're adding value. And one of the things that I do in my personal time whenever I have space is build simulation games, because I believe that simulation games or simulation exercises are the best way to actually pass on, and especially for teams. So I always build multiplayer simulation exercises, is for them to actually go through that experience. It's like, there's one thing about teaching cricket on a screen or from a book. Another one is to actually put 13 people on the field and actually get them to play the game, right? Yeah. So I build simulation games and I do it for free. So I don't really do it for any commercial games. I really love the challenge of, hey, describe a problem to me. Like someone recently described a problem about, hey, I really want to see how procurement or like the carbon emission was a problem for them, right? They were not getting the traction from the different functions about how do I bring my carbon emission down. They were ticking the box on carbon emission. Yeah. So I built a simulation game for them. It's called Net Zero Simulation Game. It's just one of the examples. Simple games, but the idea here is get people excited about, because now when people play that simulation game and let's say they play for 2 hours or 3 hours, hopefully when 2 years down the lane, they will remember some aspects of what they learned from that simulation game, right? Yeah. That's what I try to do. That's what keeps me motivated.
No, that's great. You do, though. It's true. You learn from sort of engagement and competition just as much as you would, more so than you would from reading a book. Sorry. So, and yeah, cricket has been a massive part of my life and still is a massive part of my life. And I think sport and competition, applying that to ways of business is very helpful, right? It's even to the point where you were saying earlier about consistency. To be a solid sports person, or even just to follow how many cricket matches are going on, SK, you have to be.
I know.
How you do things, it can get quite challenging. Although I'm still, India did a very good job at being consistently playing well in Dubai in the recent Champions Trophy. So they did a good job. Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much. We've done a little bit more than we thought we would do. I very much
really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a great chat. And hopefully those that listen and enjoyed it too. So, final word is just thank you so much. Good to see you.